Greetings and welcome to the first in a video devotional series that I'm creating for Aberdeen Heights, but also for a group of people that I pastor outside of Aberdeen, the Safe Harbor Project. And I hope you'll find not only this particular video, but this video series helpful for you and encouraging in your own personal walks. Now, as the inaugural video devotion, I wanted to talk about a date on the church calendar, November 1st. You might know it better as All Saints Day. Now, why do we celebrate All Saints Day? Why is that a date on the church calendar? Well, as the church in the West began to grow, many people were inspired by the service and suffering of many church leaders, and they wanted to commemorate and remember those leaders. So they set aside days to remember them. Polycarp or Agnes, St. John of the Cross, Augustine, Felicity, and a well-known one, Valentine. As the church began to grow, as the number of people serving and suffering for the gospel began to grow, these days of commemoration also began to grow. So some regions in the Western Church began to set aside one day to celebrate all saints, both those that were remembered and those that were forgotten. So by the 10th century, all of the Catholic Church was celebrating All Saints Day as a way to cover all the bases. Now, while I enjoy church history, it's not a subject that necessarily floats your boat. Still, I think that the spirit of All Saints Day embodies something that we see in the scripture, specifically Hebrews chapter 11 and chapter 12. I'm going to read some for you there. Hebrews chapter 11, beginning in verse 35, talking about the saints of old. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in the desert and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. And there's talking about they looked to God for their vindication, for a coming promised Messiah, but they did not receive that in their life. Verse 40, since God provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. And then in chapter 12, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. As we think about, or as I'm thinking about, saints that might have inspired us in our life, I want to introduce you to somebody who was a great inspiration to me. His name is James Harry McElroy, although I know him better simply as Uncle Harry. And here he is with his wife on a retirement trip in Scotland. Uncle Harry is an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church, and for most of his ministry life, he served in a small rural church in northeast Pennsylvania. There he did baptisms, he did funerals, he came alongside people in suffering, and he taught the scriptures. He taught the Bible courses at a local seminary. He coached Little League Baseball. He served as a poll worker at elections. And in general, he lived a life of quiet public service. And he continued to preach the message of God's love and mercy in a culture that was growingly hostile to that message, sometimes even in a church setting that was not always very receptive to the message of God's mercy. Was he a perfect man? Is he a perfect man? No, he's far from it. But well into his 80s, as he's facing increasing health challenges, as he survived COVID, he keeps on putting his trust in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the great promise of his own redemption. You know, the author of Hebrews wrote that familiar line, surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. And the image that he's calling to mind there is that the examples of people who have walked before him in faith, It's so thick around them. It's like a dense fog. And what I would like for you this week of All Saints Day, is to remember those who've traveled the road before you. Now, you may be very far down the road, but there are people who have traveled that part before you have. It might be a well-known saint of the church. It might be a family member. It might be a friend. It might be someone who's really quite obscure and known only to you, but nonetheless, they served as an inspiration to you as you looked at their faith, their trust, their perseverance. Think on the example that they set for you. Not that they were perfect, but in their weakness, in their failings, in their sufferings, they kept on looking for their own vindication, not in their own efforts, not in their own goodness, but in the mercy of God. Who is that hero in the faith for you? Think on how God worked in their life to give you inspiration. Find inspiration again. Blessings on you all. Have a great All Saints Day.